everyone. You're probably wondering what I'm wearing here, and it's actually a kimono. These are fan images on it, and I honestly think this is for maybe a teenager or a large child. I did Japanese dance for probably 20 years, and my family actually was able to get this for me from my teacher. And for whatever reason, I was not planning to wear this at all. And about 2 minutes ago, I made this decision that I'm just going to wear it. Today is actually the death anniversary of my grandmother. I think it's the 25-year anniversary, to be honest. The funny thing is, I've been wanting to do my follow-up videos on the concentration camps that are now the new language, or the correct language is incarceration camps, not relocation centers, not internment camps, but incarceration centers. When you have armed guards, when you have fences and people are living in fear within a confined space, that's essentially a prison. So today's actually really important for many reasons. And yes, because of my grandmother's passing anniversary, it felt like the right time to actually record this and put this out there to kind of honor a part of my heritage. I'm half Japanese, as well as some of my personal history. I started dancing when I was 6 years old, and I also played taiko, or those big Japanese group drumming, since I was 12, and so I did that for like a decade plus as well. But yeah, I think I've been saying I've been wanting to put more, Asian stories out there. This is actually in relation to going to the Day of Remembrance, which is in February, so it was a little over a month ago, and it was the signing of Executive Order 9066 by Franklin D. Roosevelt. But I know that FDR is actually quoted a lot, and I wanted to share that I had this really interesting revelation when I was going back into doing some ancestral research, especially related around 9066. And he was the one that signed the executive order that forced dozens of my family members and loved ones into these incarceration camps. So I just found it very interesting to be in that recognition of like how easy it is to forget atrocities, right? To forget what people have done. Yet he is such a revered person. He is quoted all the time by people that I respect. And I just find it to be very conflicting to have that realization of, a lot of the harm that was caused to my family line was because of the thing that this person did. The other interesting thing, and this is where in this political landscape, it really doesn't matter what side you're on in terms of righteousness or doing good or bad. Obviously, there are some that are doing way more harm than anybody else, and they tend to be on a certain side. But in the larger scheme of things, I think that's one of the things to recognize too, is that this is something that all of us have to do, which is recognize that no one is above anybody else, right? Like, we're all humans, and we are all here for our own purposes. Certain things like your upbringing, or the way that you look, the way that you speak, and where you're from really should not dictate whether or not you're, above or below anybody else. And then the interesting thing is that Reagan was actually the one who signed the apology. And so, it was just like this really interesting reflection for me of like how much you can be impacted by the media and not even realize of like, okay, there's no such thing as good or bad. It's, both, and you can, be in a victim as well as an abuser, and you can do harm and you can also do good. What I really wanted to share from this Day of Remembrance event is that because I'm now in Washington, which is where my grandma was actually born, which is so funny, and I really believe that my ancestors brought me to Washington for this purpose. So when I attended the Day of Remembrance event, it was at the fairgrounds, the Washington Fairgrounds, which was the Puyallup Assembly Center. So assembly as in this is where they basically brought people from the surrounding areas here before sending them off to the more permanent sites. I'm also going to highlight a few organizations that I feel like you should follow, support, donate to if you have the means, and definitely learn from. I think that it's very important to follow for some of these organizations for their educational content, and one of them being Densho, densho.org, the JACL, or the Japanese American Citizens League. Those are a couple that were particularly important for what I'm about to share today. So Densho does historical archiving, and they have probably the largest archive of historical artifacts from that were related to the camps. And while I was deep diving into my ancestry, I had come across this group of images that students had made, and I actually was able to find one that my grandma had made while she was in the camps. And it was some kind of like stamp project of some sort. I kind of was doing a little bit of digging because I think the person who made the donation of all of these images had the same name as my grandma. So I think there was a little bit of confusion, and then eventually I found my way back, and then I saw that she signed her name on it, so I knew for sure that was hers. And I just broke down crying. Like, when I had that realization and that connection, I bawled my eyes out for at least like 3 to 5 minutes, which when you're thinking about crying, like that's a long time to be bawling. And it wasn't necessarily like I had any conscious thoughts. I wasn't like, specifically like, oh, I know I'm connecting. It was just like this instant like opening of a flood of sadness and grief that I didn't feel was actually mine. And what's interesting is that just yesterday, I don't know why, but I decided to try to look up psychic readings relating to the camps, because a lot of psychics, they do, these like channeling sessions and stuff with celebrities and things like that. And I was just really interested if anybody had connected with anything related to the camps. And I actually found someone who went to a couple of the sites and was walking around, and it was just really interesting. But the first one I saw was Topaz in Utah, and the whole video was him like bawling, and he was saying that he had so much trouble, and this was recorded 3 years ago, and he had so much trouble connecting to the energies because he just kept breaking down crying because he just felt so much sadness and grief. And that kind of and that exact same feeling came over me at the Day of Remembrance when I was at the Puyallup Assembly Center. I had to turn it off because as I was in the energy of all of the people, and depending on your belief system, the spirits around there and the energies relating to those who were incarcerated there, this overwhelming sadness came over me, and I was about to cry, and I had to shut it off or I would have just started bawling in the middle of the presentation. And so it was a very consistent energy and emotion that it really told me that one of the most suppressed emotions of those who are incarcerated, I believe, was a very deep sadness and grief that was locked away. And I came to the conclusion, and I think I shared this in another video, that I believe that part of my, I guess, mission, not my whole life's purpose, but I think one of the big significant things I'm meant to do is help express that sadness and help express that grief, and help release it, not just for myself, but I feel like I'm able to help them grieve when they couldn't do it while they were here on earth, or especially while they were incarcerated. I got to attend the very first educational program that Densho put on yesterday. It was a collaborative event with CUNY. I'm gonna need to look this up. The historical project, that, yes. And so like the difference, there are student organizers there. I got to hear from a speaker, and I didn't think it was going to be that meaningful to the depth that it was. But this woman, she was speaking relating to her book called Minidoka Memoirs, and I was able to buy one of the last copies of this book, and she signed it in here, and I asked her to sign it in honor of my grandma, who was incarcerated at 10 years old at this camp. And so I'm really interested to read it. I haven't started yet, but I think that timing is coming closer and closer to when I'm going to. But it was really interesting because I talked to her very, very briefly, and I think she had a 1-year difference in age from my grandma. So I think her take on this is going to actually be very similar in terms of being a young child as my grandma. And I also made some donations, and I was able to get these commemorative pins that were designed by a local artist. So Minidoka was in Idaho, and then for my grandpa's family in Heart Mountain, Wyoming. So these are really cool pins that I was able to get and make some donations. And yes, I definitely, again, if you have the means, encourage you to help donate to these orgs, because the work they're doing is, so much more than just cataloging and archiving, but trying to get the education out there. They have a whole bunch of open resource materials and articles. I think they said 1,000 interviews now from formerly incarcerated folks telling their stories. And this is really some of the information that is going to help inform what's happening now, as well as what's happening in Palestine. There's so many different groups that these types of things have happened to in our history, and I have been able to get a copy of the artwork that my grandma made. Let's see what we have here. Oh, wow. It is. Oh, how cool. But how cool is this? She actually made this. And I think one of my favorite things is that a lot of the other students had like farm workers and scenery and things in the field, and hers was like man flipping pancakes or something like that. So I thought that was quite funny, because that is part of, I think, where I get my humor from as well. I get to read this newsletter that I'm excited to learn more about. So that's super cool. But yeah, I'm definitely going to see how I can support and lift this organization more, because it's already been so impactful for me, and honestly I just found out about them not too long ago through social media. So as much as I don't want to support a lot of these larger social media sites and corporations, at the same time, until we find a really strong alternative, it really is how I've so far found a lot of great organizations to support and to uplift. I feel really drawn to talk about and uplift the incarceration camp stories, especially because of the times that we're in and how closely related it is to what we're experiencing right now with ICE and detaining people and really not having a good reason to do so. Just as my family and my ancestors were incarcerated for over 2 years, separated from their homes. And one of the things I wanted to do was visit the family home before they were forcibly removed from it. My great-grandfather was some type of farmer in the area across from the Boeing airfields. But unfortunately, I don't know what happened to their home. But at some point, a couple decades later, Boeing Airfield actually, I believe, bought out that entire area and took down all the homes to create it into an industrial lands. And so that was kind of a bummer. So if I want to go see if I can tap into any of the energies there, it's really just at the intersection of an industrial area. So yeah, but I have this message: life doesn't have to be perfect to be wonderful. There you go. There you have it. I hope you enjoyed this, and I hope you feel a little bit called to maybe look up some of the history in your area, especially if you're on the West Coast. And take care and be safe, everyone.